very warm welcome to this episode of our conversation series, Sustainability in the Next Era. The challenges of today are unlike anything we faced before. And as many argue that the COVID pandemic has a positive impact on the environment, boosting economic recovery would put extreme pressures on society and natural resources that no one yet has calculated. Is the world ready for the recovery? Could it be a sustainable recovery? Non-governmental organizations have played a major role in pushing the sustainable development agenda, not only by communicating with governments and intergovernmental processes, but also by focusing their sights on powerful corporations and businesses. Businesses, on the other hand, have picked up the challenge and responded to the pressure and changed focus from the ordinary shareholder approach to more stakeholder approach. With us today is Leena Al Olaimy, who is the co-founder of 3BL Associates, Public Planet Partnerships, and Diversity on Board. She's gonna share insights and expertise on what's going on in MENA when it comes to NGOs and businesses. Hello, Leena, and thank you for being with us.
Hello, Ruba, and thank you so much for having me.
As a person who's passionate about partnerships, inclusion, how do you describe the status of the partnership between the businesses and the civil society and the NGOs in the MENA region? And from your experience, do we have successful models?
Well, I mean, I think that, and this isn't just in the MENA region, I think by and large, we still operate in a very siloed, fragmented manner. You know, governments, companies, NGOs, we all have to face these critical sustainable development challenges as we're navigating a global pandemic. But even before the pandemic, we're in this final decade of delivery with the Sustainable Development Goals. And on the one hand, you know, there's this paradox because there's this incredible revolutionary technological optimism because we're seeing how fast technology is advancing and a lot of the applications of tech for development. And then on the other hand, you know, on the other end of the spectrum, we're seeing climate change catastrophes accelerate and intensify, and now, you know, in the midst of this global pandemic. So I think that ultimately, whether it's companies, governments, or NGOs, what we're really missing is the mindset that sustainable development or environmental sustainability is not an add-on or something that is separate from human development. It's not separate from the bottom line. It's not separate from national economic growth. And we often see a really big disconnect between the two. So you hear companies and governments say, we'll fix the economy or we'll fix the bottom line and then we'll come back to environmental sustainability. And as I'm sure you're probably aware, when we talk about sustainable development and the investment gap that we need to fill, it's $2.5 trillion a year, we're often looking to the private sector and public-private partnerships when, you know, if you think about it, we're overlooking our biggest social and economic partner, which is planet Earth itself. You know, planet Earth is the most sustainable startup or business. It's figured out how to survive for billions of years. It is the greatest innovator and engineer and designer, has the most sophisticated algorithms, and it's eliminated the concept of waste. It's eliminated unemployment, overconsumption, and, you know, nature or natural capital is worth more than $125 trillion a year. And that's an estimate because nature is not linear in growth. So when you think about how we're looking to public-private partnerships and not public-planet partnerships, I think that we are missing out on a huge opportunity, and it's a massive reframe in thinking because at worst we're exploiting nature, And at best, we're protecting or conserving nature. And then you have a handful of people who are, looking to learn from nature, so biomimicry. But by and large, we're not looking at how do we partner with nature in a way that is mutually beneficial for us and for nature. So that's really the impetus that led us to design public-planet partnerships as a methodology that would enable anybody, whether it's a government or a business or a civil society, a change maker, to design those collaborations.
And this mindset shift, how can we do it? Like, whose responsibility is it to push for this transformation and how people perceive sustainability, Leena?
It's a really good question. Ultimately, I think it's the responsibility of multiple sectors. I don't think this is something that can be led only by government or only by companies or only by civil society. I think each sector has a strength, and this is part of the fragmentation I'm talking about. Is you'll have a company or a government or civil society trying to play the role of the many different actors, whereas if you streamline the skills and the expertise and the resources, including the education and awareness of this new approach, it will be much more effective and will be able to accelerate that thinking. It's like, if you remember 10 years ago with entrepreneurship in the MENA region, we really had nothing. As far as stories go, we always look to Aramex and Fadi Rendour, and now we have much more of these examples and acquisitions. So the more that you see these successful stories and case studies, it does two things. It creates the awareness, but it also creates the sense of possibility that I can do this too, and this is how it's being done, and now I can try and apply that. So I really think that sort of awareness and those examples are really important in taking us through that path.
Thank you for bringing up the RMX example, because I was going to also ask you about your views on how corporate social responsibility has been evolving globally and in MENA. I know that RMX probably was the first company to follow the Global Reporting Initiative and produce its sustainability reports, and they still do. There are many companies are doing that now. But do you see that the shift towards a broader sense of CSR? Because I think corporate responsibility could be a disconnect and could be a driver for impact when it comes to partnerships. How do you see the CSR concept moving in our part of the world, and how can we maybe reshape it, especially with the post-pandemic recovery agenda?
Unfortunately, I wish I wasn't repeating the same thing that I was saying 10 years ago when we started 3BL. Look, I think CSR is definitely evolving in the region. I don't think it's evolving fast enough, if I'm honest. I'm saying the same thing today when people ask me that question that I was in 2010, which is that by and large, and I'm not saying that there aren't companies that are doing otherwise, but by and large, the understanding and the practice of CSR in the region is donations, sponsorship, maybe some volunteering, community engagement or a beach cleanup. It's still very separate to the way that the company actually makes its profit. It's more, what do we do with our profits after we've made them, rather than something that is seen as a strategic issue that should feed into corporate strategy and be mutually reinforcing. So impact, whether it's social impact or environmental, is not separate to corporate strategy and making money.
If you were put in a decision-making position, Leena, moving forward now post COVID-19, how would you encourage creative engagement from civil society, NGOs, especially that they're really growing in number every day, whether in Jordan or in other parts of our region? We hear about new NGOs, especially environmental, led by women and youth. how would you encourage their creative participation in the process of a sustainable recovery, and how would they impact also the industrial or the business side of the story?
That's a really good question. I think in this case, it's something that needs to come from government, where there's either a requirement for organizations, so the other government organizations, but also the private sector, to develop and submit multi-stakeholder engagement plans, where they're at least asking the question. You would never have a strategy document, for example, without a communication strategy, like how are we going to communicate this? That is a standard element of any, whatever organization and sector you're in. Stakeholder engagement needs to be equally ubiquitous in all of these strategies. How are you collaborating, within government, so with other government entities, so we're not wasting resources and time. I'm sure you know as well as I do that even within governments, within companies, even within the social sector and NGOs, there tends to be competition sometimes, and it's a little about ego and who's going to solve the issue and do everything alone, when the reality is this is not a hero's journey, it's a collective journey. And I think incentivizing but also rewarding collaboration, and having the government reward the organizations that are excelling at really being collaborative and designing those models, celebrating those success stories, that recognition, I think, would go a long way. And then also to give maybe tax incentives to companies that are diverting some of their funds to strategically support NGOs to do the work that is saving the government expenditure.
Leena, you are also active in the inclusion and in the diversity side, and of course they are part of the sustainability agenda. Sustainability is not only environment, although many people tend to package it that way. And you are a female entrepreneur yourself, and you have a lot on your plate. And my next question is, how do you manage to stay focused, and how do you see yourself as a woman empowering women?
Now, I'm not a fan of pitting, men against women and saying women are better. I prefer the term gender equity to gender empowerment or women's empowerment. I think that it's really about the complementarity between all, genders, between races, religions, professional backgrounds, personalities. It's that diversity that gives you the 360-degree perspective. And that's why, if I can share a little bit of a nature nerd fact with you, that's why the logo of Diversity on Board is a dragonfly, because the dragonfly is one of only two species in the entire world that has 360-degree vision. So the eyes of a dragonfly can see all the way around. The other one is a chameleon, but a chameleon gives like a negative, has like a negative connotation. So we went with the dragonfly. But I think that, when it comes to having women in the boardroom, especially at this time, again, I'm not pitting men against women, but there have been a lot of articles, I'm sure you've read, about women's leadership during the pandemic, and how countries with women leaders have registered less cases, less deaths. Obviously, there are many more male leaders, and there needs to be more rigorous research if we're looking at things very academically. But I think that it's definitely worth considering why that is the case, and why we should have women in the boardroom. I mean, or in these leadership positions, not just because it's good for the economy or good for society, but also it's a moral imperative. I mean, no one is making the business case for men to be in leadership, and nor should they. It should just be an equal representation of society.
Thank you, Leena. I registered for the webinar, so hopefully this is going to be very interesting. So thank you so much, and keep going. We're inspired by you.